first off, what are events or browser events? Really, they're just things of interest that take place in the browser. So that can include a number of things, but probably the ones we're interested in include ones such as when a user clicks on something, when they mouse over or mouse out of something.
Hey guys!
When if you're on a mobile device, when you're touching something, when you're interacting with form fields, when you're typing. By the way, feel free to stop me anytime if you have any questions. Now, there are lots of other events. This is just not even a complete list from the Mozilla Developer Network, but things that have to do with the page loading and different things happening. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about. You're not going to worry about the majority of these. Ones such as these is probably what you're going to focus on. So you might wonder, what's interesting about browser events, or why is it a good topic for the beginner session tonight? And while if you're a beginner learning JavaScript, it's good to learn about things like functions and looping and if-else statements and such. But getting into these types of events and what you can do with them, you can really start interacting with the user and do some interesting things. So that the key to kind of tying into what the user does and doing something in response. So how can we use events? First off, let's get the kind of terminology you'll hear a lot out of the way. So an event handler or event listener is basically any function with any kind of code you want in it that you'll register that will be called when an event is fired. So when a click happens, when somebody hovers over something, when they focus the form field. And you can have any kind of code you have. You add that event listener to a certain elements or multiple elements, and it will be called when the event happens. And you can have multiple event listeners per any given event. And that event handler is passed an event object, which has some useful methods and information about the event. So say you have a button, and you want something to happen when somebody clicks the button. So that code will be in your event handler. You register the event handler and bind it basically to that element when it's going to be clicked. And like I said, you can have multiple event handlers bound to that button for that event. So when the user clicks the button, all your event handlers get called. And the order they're called just depends on the order in which you register them. And then the event object is passed to that to the event handlers, and it'll have information about the specific event that happened. So I'm going to use jQuery for these examples, largely just because there are some differences, especially with older versions of IE, with how you deal with events. And I'd rather talk about some of the more interesting things about events than get into those browser differences. And as usual, jQuery gives you a nice uniform API and irons out those differences so you don't have to worry about them. So the first thing you'll want is an element or multiple elements that you're interested in an event happening on or to. And so you'll get those just like you normally would with jQuery. All the anchor tags on a page, an element with a certain ID, something with class. And the primary method you'll use with jQuery to register an event listener is the on method. And the first parameter it takes is the name of the event, which is just a string with the name of the event, like click or submit. And the second parameter is your handler, which will just be a function with any arbitrary code you want to run when that event happens. So let's get into some actual examples so you can see different things you can do with events and some of the particular characteristics of event handling. So here's an example where we have 3 text areas, and when you type in a text area, when you type in the text area, it should update the character count. unless I miss something. Let's do some debugging. Remember last time Toby talked about debugging? I'm missing jQuery. Of course, I'm probably using. Thought I had another connection. I'm probably using a CDN version of jQuery. So this is probably a lesson for another topic. Or just always. No, I have that local. Oh, you know what? It's the way I'm running the server. That's interesting. All right. Let's try this. Yep, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so type in the box. And underneath that box, you get a live character count when any character is typed. And kind of for demonstration purposes, I have a few different boxes here, and they're updated on their own with their individual character count. So when you're thinking about how to accomplish this, first you want to think about what element are you actually interested in the event happening on. In this case, it's these text areas. So those are your elements you're actually going to listen to the event on. Then you're going to think about what event you want to listen for. There are various events that have to do with the user typing. Key down, key press, key up. In this case, we'll use the key up. So anytime a user releases the key, it will update the character count. And that includes the delete key. So it'll go down if you start deleting text. So here's the code for this. And so as you see, we're looking at the text areas. We're looking at the key up event. And then this is our event handler, the function with our code we're going to run. And so the thing to note on this one is we're using the this keyword. And the this keyword, or this, it's probably a topic for probably a full-length discussion on JavaScript. But for the purposes of events, it's good to know that this, at least as far as jQuery is concerned, inside an event handler will equal the element that the event is taking place on, the exact element. So while we're listening, we're actually paying attention to 3 different text areas. This will equal only that text area which is being typed into. That way, all these can get updated individually, and they won't. You're not worried about interfering using another one. So if we change this to text area, see, when you type, it changes all of them, and not just the individual one. And then basically using that text area, we get its value, which is all the text inside of it, and the length of that is how many characters have been typed. And then we update. We also basically use the this variable here, since we're putting in that variable, to only update the span that's nearest by with its character count. So that's our first point, is that the inside an event handler, this equals the element involved in the event. Here's another example. Might look familiar, where you have some text and it's actually truncated. There's more text, but you don't want to show the user all the text at first glance. So you have a read more button. And when, let me fix this for this one. We'll have the same problem. There we go. When you click it, it slides down the rest of the text. And this is simplified for demonstration purposes. You can imagine it being on a page with a bunch of blog posts where you just show an excerpt, but then you want the user to be able to see the full text if they click, read more. So let's take a look at the code for this one. Since it's a simple demo, we're just listening to the only anchor tag on the page. We're interested in when the user clicks it. And this time we're taking we're interested in the event object that is passed to the event handler. So anytime you listen for an event, you'll receive this event object. And it's common practice to call it E or EV or event. But any of those, you can call it whatever you want. And so the first line here you see it says e.prevent default. And to kind of understand what that does, it might be good to see what happens when we don't have that line in here. So if I refresh, you'll see here that this actually links to another page, and it's a page that has the full text of this text. But it actually goes to that page, and instead of sliding down the text, it goes to a completely different page. So in this example, say instead of actually going to that page, we want to progressively enhance the page with JavaScript by having it slide down. Because say we're on a page with a lot more going on, we don't actually want to take the user off this page. We just want to show them the rest of the text. So what the browser is just doing is default behavior. When you click on a link, the default behavior is to go to that link, of course. So somewhat self-explanatory that when we call prevent default, we're actually preventing the default behavior of the action of the browser. So this is something that is on any given event object. This method, you can call it, and it'll stop the default behavior. And then we simply slide down the extra text, and then we use the this keyword again to hide the button, since we don't need it anymore. So with the prevent default this time, instead of going to that page, it just slides down the text.
Is prevent default the jQuery function, or is it?
That's part of the standard. So it's something that is different in older versions of IE, and jQuery will basically put it in place so that it's uniform. But modern browsers all have prevent default, even in the default. Good question. So then let's take another look at something you can do with the event object. So here's an example where we have a blank canvas, and anywhere you click on the canvas, it will draw a circle at the spot that the user clicks. So this time, again, we're interested in the user clicking, but we need to find out where exactly the user clicks. So we can utilize the event object to find out that information. Don't worry too much about these first 3 lines. They're basically some setup. But we're using an HTML5 canvas. We listen for the click event, and we need to find out, what are the coordinates, the x and y, for where the user clicked. And there are a number of properties that are on the event object that can give you this sort of information based on what you're trying to do. In this case, there's actually an offset x and offset y property that give you the x and y coordinates of the event relative to its relatively positioned or its positioned parent. And it's a good way to see, how, what kind of things this event object has. If we put, sorry, I'm going back and forth. If we put a debugger here, again, going back to how we taught us last time, and then refresh. When we click, it'll hit that debugger, and it'll break there. So then, here we can look at this E parameter that we took in, and you'll see it has a number of properties. Things like, so if you're interested in someone typing, you can see whether they have the Alt key pressed. You'll see there are a number of different ones that are suffixed with X and Y, and that basically give you coordinates based on different relative positions on the screen. So at least one of these will give you the position of where the event took place relative to the viewport. And like I said, the offset X and offset Y here give you the position based on its relative parent. But there might be a number of different properties in the event object that you could take advantage of when handling events. So this is part of just the Canvas API. Let's see, we're able to utilize the X and Y to basically point to the center of the circle we want. Radius is 20, and then it's simply stroking that path to create the circle. So we have there's a bunch of useful information in the event object that you can take advantage of. So there's a bunch more to be learned about events. Things like bubbling, capturing, event delegation, custom events, but probably maybe out of the scope of this talk, or maybe they'll be good for another talk or for your own research. So here are a few resources that are good for learning more about events. Karupa.com is a site I've had recommended by a couple beginners for beginners learning about JavaScript, and they have at least a few pages about browser events. Eloquent JavaScript is basically a book that starts from kind of a beginner topics to more advanced topics, and there's a chapter on browser events. And the Mozilla Developer Network is a great resource for referencing different things about events. That huge long list of all the events that was up before came from there. So any questions? Cool.
I actually just wanted to point out, Eloquent JavaScript has a built-in console, it's different than the browser console, so it's an interactive environment.
Yeah.
Learning JavaScript, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Just couldn't hear you point out the Eloquent JavaScript. One of the great things is that it actually has a built-in kind of interactive exercises. So you don't even have to leave the page to try out different things with JavaScript and to run the code he's teaching you. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much.